Hey there. I didn't realize you guys were watching. Welcome back to another great video. You guys ready to go see a ghost town? Myself and my buddy Ethan behind the camera are about to go adventure at a privately owned abandoned ghost mine and ghost town here in the Black Hills. So follow along, like, subscribe, and share the video. And I'm going to have to put this book down. Watson Parker's a good author, but it's time to go see some real history. Alright, let's go. We have a jam-packed episode for you guys today. We are headed to 3 different mines in one video. We're starting off our adventures at the historic Cloverleaf gold mine. The Cloverleaf was first discovered in 1878, but in 1889 it was purchased by a Frenchman by the name of Pierre Wibou. Upon purchasing the mine in 1889, Pierre built a 60 stamp mill, and records show the mill took out $900,000 in gold by 1905. In today's money, that would be just shy of $32 million. Historians tell us that the founders of the Cloverleaf, formerly the Uncle Sam mine, pulled out nearly $30,000 in just 2 days in 1878. It's quoted as being a rich mine. Some say when Pierre purchased the mine, he revived what was the dying town of Perry, and with it came a name change. The town's new name would be Obey, in honor of Pierre's hometown. Obey was comprised of a population of a little over 500 in its heyday. The town had a schoolhouse, general store, post office, hospital, and a bachelor's shack, among other buildings in town. Today, only a few original buildings are still left standing. Upon researching the mine, we were able to take a tour on the grounds of the Cloverleaf to see what is still there today, and the history is very much still alive. As we arrived on the grounds of the Cloverleaf mine, the history and research side of things really started coming alive. We realized we were standing where one of the largest mines in the Black Hills used to sit. We were excited to meet up with Joe, the owner, and learn more about the history of this property.
Pile of mine, those buildings were all the way from there, clear back to almost this building. This was a huge operation. All about where I got that junk pile and pallets. That was about the front of the building. You can see some of the old posts coming out of the ground over there. This was all filled with tunnels from their early workings.
According to local historians, the mine goes down to the 700-foot level. The mine had openings at the 400, 500, 600, and 700-foot levels. According to papers, the 600 level goes in for about 220 feet or 73 yards. What you are looking at here is where the original shaft that was sunk to the 700-foot level once sat. Today it's marked by rusty pipe and some rotten wood. After we saw where the shaft used to be, Joe took us over along the hillside to see some old foundations and what was left of possibly an old bachelor's shack. We asked Joe if he had any idea of what sort of buildings sat over on this hillside. He had some educational guesses, but no solid evidence. You could tell whatever once sat over here was old, as it was rock foundations. Our guess is a possible early mining camp of sorts. According to Black Hills historian Watson Parker's records, he also came across some foundations on this very hillside in the 1960s. So whatever it is, was not there in the 1960s. What you are looking at here is an old caved-in adit. The miners would have used this to access the tunnels and underground mine workings. As we walked along the old mine grounds, it was just interesting to think about what this place would have been like in the early 1900s. It's always fun to think about. Here at the Cloverleaf, a good majority of the ore was considered free milling, and they would use mercury amalgamation to get 85 to 90% of the gold out of it. What you're about to see is what's left of that amalgamation process.
Later on years, they dug a big aqueduct over here.
And this was called a what?
Well, in the history books they'll call it, in parentheses, plate house, which is probably slang for amalgamation plate. Water, sometimes it's chemical, sometimes it's air, into that sand, and you're keeping it agitated. The light sand will move off the top and the gold will sink to the bottom. Then at some point they got to come in and clean But I don't think they ever used this, but I don't know.
We believe this may have been where some of the boilers used to sit when the mine was in production. After we saw where possibly the amalgamation process took place, Joe walked us over to where the large historic mill at one point stood tall over the town.
Rails would have come across at the top of the mound and would have went in the end of the building right behind you.
Today, not much is left of the original Cloverleaf gold mine. What you're looking at here is where the 60 stamp mill used to sit proud and tall overlooking the community. The story of what happened to the mine is kind of sad. In the summer of 1905, the pump that sat at the bottom of the mine shaft failed. And the result of it failing? Well, you can guess, flooding. To make matters worse, shortly after the flood, a wildfire ended up burning through town, burning a majority of the buildings and the mine buildings with it. Records show that following the flooding and the large wildfire, the damage toll was pretty high. And at this point in time, Pierre wanted to sell what was left of the mine. However, no one stepped up to make the large purchase. Maybe it was because of the gold, maybe it was because of the damage. We really have no idea why. The mine and what was left of it would sit abandoned until about the 1930s. Sometime in the 1930s, a local South Dakota mining company decided to try and bring some life back to the good old Cloverleaf gold mine. The local mining company placed 45 plus miners underground and tried to rework the old mine. Unfortunately, they had no luck and pulled out barely any profit whatsoever. The mining company would then move west to find better and richer ground. What you are about to see is where the old railroad once connected to the 60 stamp mill. In the next few clips, you guys will get to witness something that people call magic and others call science. What you're about to witness is Joe's son Gavin witching ground, and he uses dowsing rods to do this. We'll let him explain.
Let's see. What do I call it?
Divine.
Divine. Dad calls it witching.
Okay.
And I'm looking for a tunnel over there and how deep the roof of the tunnel is.
The act of witching has been used for over 8,000 years. Some call this science a practice, others call it a technique, whatever you want to call it. This is often used to find things like gold and other underground minerals, as well as water, believe it or not. So what Gavin is doing is once he gets close to his target, his rods will cross without him physically crossing them. That's how he knows he's on top of it or is at his target.
I was 17.
Right there.
Here is a prime example. Watch as Joe walks up with the rock to Gavin. Before we left, Joe said he had one more thing to show us. And check out this awesome tree that Joe has on his property. Isn't that magnificent? Well, that wraps up the adventures at the Cloverleaf Gold Mine. Special thank you to Joe and Gavin for having us on the property and showing us around. And we are off to our next mine of the day. This next mine has a name, but out of landowners' respect, we'll call it Gold Fever Mine. It seems that this miner who worked this mine had a case of it. On this adventure, we're going to take a look at two forms of mining. The first example will be underground, and the second will be an old dredging operation that's historic to the town. At one time, the nearby ghost town of Castleton, that the large mine supported, was home to a population that sat around the 300 mark. The town consisted of numerous shacks, boarding homes, saloons, and historians even tell us that there was a women's jewelry shop that was in town. Today, only a marker is left of the former town site. In order to get to the underground workings, we had to cross the creek and follow an old, rough mining trail. But it was all part of the adventure. We loved it. The owner Todd explained to us that this mine is old, possibly dating back to the late 1880s, if not early. They purchased it recently from a miner who spent his life working this mine and a nearby creek. Locals in the area said that they have numerous stories and memories about the man who used to work this mine. The common saying and the common story around these parts was that the miner had gold fever. This mine was full of old artifacts, among other things. It seems maybe the miner who used to mine this used to live in here at one point, as it had a fireplace inside of it. As we explored the drift, we could tell that this rock was not the most stable. Looking at the supports, they seemed old and unsteady. This mine is probably not the safest, and you could tell that there was a recent cave-in, possibly by the owner or possibly by old age. It was still neat to see the history that was inside of this and think about where this mine at one point went. The following clips are from what's left inside of the so-called Gold Fever mine drift. Once we finished exploring the 1880s underground rift, we exited the mine and went to investigate the nearby 1900s dredging operation. Historians tell us that sometime between 1911 and 1914, a large dredge worked this creek for gold. You could tell it had been mined as the spoil piles in places were 2 stories tall. According to some historical literature on the mine's history, the dredge was ran by 100% electricity. The dredge would have sat on a floating platform on the creek as it dug. The dredging process was not very complicated. The dredge would have shoveled the dirt or the creek bed in front of it, then it would have cleaned the rock, and then it would proceed to dump the spoils behind it as it proceeded forward. This is how the dredge process would have worked. The owner Todd told us that sometime in 1915, the dredge was deconstructed and sold off to a buyer located somewhere in Oregon. The selling of the dredge was kind of the end-all for the miners and the nearby ghost town. Today, all that's left of the dredging site is some large rock piles and large pools of water. Nearby, you will find an array of summer homes and the original ribs of the dredge. Other than that, it's just another ghost in the Black Hills. Well, that wraps up our adventures in the Castleton area. We are off to our third and final mine adventure of the video. We want to give a special thank you to Todd and his wife for having us on the property and letting us document it. On this next mine exploration, not much history is known. We know that records show it was a larger mine and it was home to a small company town. What that town size looked like, we don't know. Today, the mine is only a skeleton of its former self. A fire went through and burned the remaining buildings and the large company mill that once serviced the mine. The mine entrance is now flooded, and the history is pretty much erased for the most part. This is a prime example of a true Black Hills ghost mine. Today, nature is quickly reclaiming what was once a thriving large company mine. We want to give a special thanks to Jim for letting us on the property and documenting the history of it. It's amazing what you own, Jim. Well, that wraps up our adventures on this episode. Make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss a single one of our videos.